Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I provide an update in the case of the Delphi murders? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of the Delphi murders, including the timeline of the crime, move to the background of the suspect, then offer my analysis. In 2017, 14-year-old Liberty German and 13-year-old Abigail Williams lived in Delphi, Indiana. This is a small town with a population just under 3,000. It is about a half-hour northeast of Lafayette. On February 13, 2017, at 1:35 p.m., Liberty's older sister dropped the girls off on County Road 300 North so they could hike on the Delphi historic trails. The girls were also planning on taking photographs. Liberty and Abigail hiked to the Mononhigh Bridge, which is also called the High Bridge. This railroad bridge was built in 1891 and abandoned in 1987. It crosses Deer Creek. At 2:07 p.m., Liberty posted an image of Abigail walking on the bridge. The girls were never heard from again. Not long after this image was taken, Liberty and Abigail were murdered. The girls failed to meet a family member as planned at 3:15 p.m. They were reported missing at 5:30 p.m. At about noon the next day, February 14, the bodies of Liberty and Abigail were found on the north bank of Deer Creek, about a half a mile east of the abandoned railroad bridge. Liberty's phone was recovered, and the police discovered a video she had taken with it not long before she was murdered. The video was of a man wearing a blue jacket, blue jeans, and a cap walking toward the phone. Presumably, this was the killer. The man can be heard saying the words, "down the hill," as if he was issuing an order to the girls. The police indicated that other evidence of value was on Liberty's phone, but they didn't say what they found. The police released a sketch of a man that had been seen on the Delphi historic trails on the day of the murders. 2 years later, in 2019, the police released a replacement of that sketch, which looks quite a bit different. The police investigated a number of people in connection with the murders. One of these was a man named Ronald Logan. The bodies of Liberty and Abigail were found on his property, just 1,400 feet from his residence. Ronald was never charged in connection with the murders, and he died in 2020. It's not clear if the police believe that he was involved. Reportedly, he gave a false alibi about where he was on the day of the murders, and even asked someone to lie for him to support the alibi. This behavior is inconsistent with being innocent. A search warrant application for his home revealed some information about the case. Liberty and Abigail lost a lot of blood during the murders. The killer would have been covered in blood. The application indicated that the killer may have moved and staged the victims' bodies and may have taken some type of souvenir. A weapon was mentioned, but the type of weapon was redacted from the document. Another person the police investigated was a man named Keegan Anthony Klein. He lived near Delphi, Indiana, and had profiles on Instagram and Snapchat, which he used to target underage girls. He posed as a model in order to encourage the girls to send him inappropriate photographs and to arrange meetings. He was arrested for charges unrelated to the murders of Liberty and Abigail and is not considered a person of interest. Over 5 years after the Delphi murders, on October 26, 2022, a 50-year-old man named Richard Matthew Allen was arrested. 2 days later, he was charged with 2 counts of murder. He pleaded not guilty and reportedly is refusing to cooperate with the investigation. At the time making this video, the probable cause affidavit is sealed. The police have not said much about the case. They indicated they would not rule out the possibility that others were involved with the murders of Liberty and Abigail. Richard Allen had never been publicly named as a suspect prior to his arrest. His jury trial is scheduled to begin on March 20, 2023, but a lot could change between now and then. Let's take a look at the background of Richard Allen. Richard grew up in the town of Mexico, Indiana. In 1991, He graduated from high school in Miami County, Indiana. He moved to Delphi in 2006. Richard has been known to go by the name Rick or Ricky, and according to jail records, he has used an alias. He is married to a woman named Kathy. They have a 28-year-old daughter. Richard was 44 years old when the murders occurred. He does not have any criminal record. He only had traffic offenses, a seatbelt violation in 2003, and 2 speeding tickets, 2005 and 2011. The police responded to his residence in 2015 for an alleged domestic violence incident, but no arrest was made. Richard's home is located about 2.5 miles from the Monon High Bridge. He worked at a local CVS store as a licensed pharmacy technician. He was licensed in 2018. As part of his job, Richard regularly interacted with members of the community. Liberty's grandparents said that Richard processed photographs connected to Liberty. He did not charge them for the photographs. Several people in the Delphi community described Richard as normal. It sounds like they did not think twice about their interactions with him. Some indicated that Richard didn't talk too much. For example, one restaurant server suggested Richard was quiet. Richard and his wife regularly visited a bar, which later closed. They were there 3 or 4 times a week. Richard liked to play pool. In December of 2021, Richard's wife Kathy posted an image on Facebook of herself and Richard at a local bar. Richard can be seen smiling alongside his wife. On the wall behind him is the 2019 sketch of the suspect released by the police. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts in a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. At the time making this video, Richard Allen is presumed innocent. However, the police of course believe that he is actually guilty. By charging him, they are making a bold move. If Richard is not actually guilty, the police just pretty much destroyed their chances of convicting whoever is. They must believe they have at least a decent case against Richard. Item number 2. There is no way to know what the state's case looks like because the affidavit of probable cause is sealed. There are many unanswered questions. What initially led the police to investigate Richard? Did Richard Allen work alone, or was he in a conspiracy? The police searched his home, a fire pit in his yard, and his car. Did they find any physical evidence, like DNA? The police mentioned some time ago that there was more information on Liberty's phone than they released to the public. The video of the man on the bridge was 43 seconds long. Perhaps this additional information pointed to Richard. Item number 3. Some people have wondered why Richard Allen did not move away from Delphi, Indiana, assuming, of course, he's actually guilty. Richard really seemed to be taking his chances by staying in the town. Based on the image of him in front of the sketch, which was posted on social media, it appears as though he was not afraid of getting caught. Maybe he figured he would just cross that bridge when he came to it. Other than being a little quiet, Richard did not appear to make any effort to avoid contact with people. He even stayed in a job which required frequent interactions with the public. One possibility for Richard staying in town is that he was not very good at math. From the very beginning of the investigation, the police believed the killer was from Delphi, Indiana. An abandoned railway bridge would be an unusual place to stalk victims for a perpetrator who is visiting that area. They might view it as a bridge too far. From the video, a few assumptions can be made about the man on the bridge. He was probably in his 5th decade of life, so in his 40s. He was a white male who may have been a little heavy and was between 5'6" and 5'10". There are 2,972 people in Delphi, Indiana. To make it easier, I'll just use 3,000. If we take the characteristics of the man on the bridge and apply it to this quantity, the number of potential matches is reduced significantly. For example, being male reduces the number to about 1,500. Being white reduces it to 1,200 based on the demographics of Delphi. Being in the 40s reduces that number to about 240. And having the general body type of the man seen in the video probably cuts that number down to around 120. Considering this was a high-profile investigation, it stands to reason that the police would explore every resident of Delphi who matched the man caught in the video. Richard Allen would have been better off leaving the area if he could have done so without being suspicious. Item number 4. If Richard Allen is the killer, what potential personality characteristics does he possess? This is just a theory, my opinion. First, let's take a look at the initial profile of the killer. These are the expected characteristics before Richard Allen was charged, so when nothing was known about the killer. The killer was thought to be a male under 35 years old, poorly educated, unemployed or underemployed. He probably had a series of failed romantic relationships, was impulsive and irresponsible, a long history of criminal behavior, sensation-seeking, a lack of empathy, a desire to be sexually dominant, substance use problems, and he was probably antisocial. This profile fits closely with Factor 2 psychopathy. This original profile does not hold up well when compared to what we now know about Richard Allen. For example, Richard appeared to be relatively normal. He had no criminal record. He is older than expected. He had a history of steady employment. His job involved interacting with people and being helpful. And he appears to have had a stable, long-term romantic relationship. There is a report about him spending time in a bar, and the alleged domestic violence incident in 2015 involved alcohol, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he had a substance use problem. Given what we now know, here are the potential personality characteristics for Richard, again assuming that he's actually the killer. Fantasizing about committing a crime consistent with harming children, being sadistic, opportunistic, and having some degree of superficial charm, having a lack of empathy and remorse, and being calm under pressure. This potential personality profile would line up with Factor 1 psychopathy. I think what may have happened in this case is that Richard was open to the idea of harming a child. When he saw Liberty and Abigail on the bridge, he decided that it was time to indulge in his fantasy. He threw caution to the wind and committed a double murder to satisfy his impulses. After the homicides, Richard went back to being careful. He tried to cover up his crime and was almost successful, but fortunately, the police were able to build a bridge to the past. Now moving to my final thoughts. One of the most frightening aspects of this case is how the alleged perpetrator would have been one of the last people suspected of the crime by those who knew him. He stepped out of his everyday life, committed 2 homicides, and then returned to his life seamlessly, like it never happened. He lived his life with no fear of getting caught. He may have even taken some enjoyment living in the community where everybody was suspicious of each other and worried about the identity of the killer. This made him feel like the smartest person in the town. There was a big secret. Everybody wanted to know the answer. It was talked about all the time, but only Richard knew the truth. People thought he was normal, but he knew that he was not. Maybe he viewed himself as some type of legendary criminal who committed one of the most notorious offenses in the history of Indiana, yet walked around free in the midst of terrified residents. When people think about killers, there's a certain image which comes to mind. For example, a career criminal who commits increasingly serious crimes over the course of his life. Richard wasn't like this at all, which makes him all the more disturbing. He was a normal and ordinary guy who fit in relatively well, yet may have lived his life a hair's breadth away from committing a heinous crime at any minute. His dark desires rumble below the surface of a mundane existence, waiting for a chance to bridge the gap between fantasy and reality. Those are my thoughts on the Delphi murders. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.